Here is what you need to know about the focal length of a lens. More important for us than classification is, how does the focal length change your image? The shorter the focal length of a lens, photographers call it the wider the lens, the smaller the projected image of your subject. That way, wide-angle lenses can capture a bigger angle of the scene, hence the name. The longer the lens, on the other hand, the bigger the subject will be projected onto your image. Here are examples of different focal lengths of the same scene. These images are shot on a full-frame sensor, respectively camera. We will start with a nice wide 16mm lens. The lens covers a very wide angle of view, that's why these kind of lenses are even called ultra-wide-angle lenses. Next is 21mm and 24mm, 28mm and 35mm. Next is a 50mm lens, which is usually very affordable. The next one is 85mm. From here upwards, lenses are called telephoto lenses. 85mm and the following 135mm are very popular portrait lenses. Now we continue with 200mm. 400mm, which is often used for sports photography or wildlife. And we stop our list with rather extreme 800mm. Let's recap. We went from 16mm all the way to 800mm. So you see, the lenses with longer focal lengths are like binoculars or telescopes. They just bring objects closer or enlarge them, if you will.
What's up guys, I'm Lee Morris with fstoppers.com, and today we're going to be talking about lens compression. In fact, I'm going to show you how lens compression doesn't exist at all. Big thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Now we've all seen animations like this before using zoom lenses. To create this animation, what I did was I got really close in Patrick's face with a 15mm lens. I backed up, and as I backed up, I zoomed in with a range of different lenses, and then I stabilized everything in post-processing to get this really interesting effect. As you can see, when I'm very close to Patrick's face, you can't see the gazebo behind him at all. And then as I back up and zoom in, the gazebo becomes humongous, so big in fact that we can actually see all the way through it. Now this animation may prove to you that lens compression does exist, but I actually want to show you that it's not the lens producing this look at all. It's actually the distance of the camera from the subject and from the background. Now I'm going to prove this to you in two different ways. The first way is the easiest. First of all, I'm going to set David up in front of the exact same gazebo. I'm going to back up and zoom in with a 400mm lens. Here's what that shot looks like. Now without moving, I'm going to throw on a 24-70mm lens, and I'm going to shoot at 24mm. As you can see, we have a much wider looking shot here, but if I crop in to create the exact same field of view, you'll notice that these shots line up exactly. All of the distortion that you would assume that you would have with the 24mm lens is completely non-existent if we crop into the middle of the frame. So let's talk about what's actually happening here and why lens compression doesn't really exist. Let's say that this first shot that I took of Patrick, I'm approximately 1 foot away from his face. But let's say I'm 50 feet away from the gazebo behind him. As I move back just 1 foot away from Patrick's face, now instead of 1 foot, I'm 2 feet away, Patrick's head size in relation to the frame will drop 50%. It will be half the size as it was. But the gazebo is remaining approximately the same size, because for me to half the size of the gazebo, I would have to move 50 feet back. Now, as I keep moving back, once I actually hit 50 feet away from where I started, the gazebo is now half the size, but Patrick is 50 times smaller. So the animation that I created is a little misleading because it appears that Patrick is remaining the same size while the gazebo is growing, but in reality what's happening is both the gazebo and Patrick are shrinking down, Patrick is just shrinking down at a much faster rate. And then we're zooming in or cropping in to compensate for that. Now, the same thing that's happening with Patrick and his relation to the gazebo behind him is also happening on his face. You'll notice in the first few shots where I'm very close to him, his nose looks gigantic and his ears look really small. And that's because the distance from his nose to the camera is exponentially closer than from his ears to the camera.